What if the brightest witch of her age carried a secret sorrow no one ever noticed, not even the ones who fought beside her? The question lingers as you picture the quiet after curfew at Hogwarts, where moonlight pools across the ancient stone floors and the scent of old parchment clings to the air like memory itself. You move through the library's rows, where every shelf hums with whispers of the past, and you catch sight of her, Hermione Granger, sitting alone at a desk with her wand casting a faint golden glow. Her eyes move quickly, but not across words. They drift somewhere far away, toward ghosts of choices she cannot undo. You think you'd survive a night like this, surrounded by books instead of battles, but you probably won't. At least, not without feeling the pull of that same quiet ache she hides behind perfection. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. The night air seems to hum with anticipation, as if the castle itself is listening, waiting for you to notice what everyone else ignored, that Hermione's grief began not in war, but in silence. I'm really curious, from which part of the world are you watching this video? Write your country in the comments. Let's see how far this little story has traveled. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. What if the brightest witch of her age carried a secret sorrow no one ever noticed, not even the ones who fought beside her? The question lingers as you picture the quiet after curfew at Hogwarts, where moonlight pools across the ancient stone floors and the scent of old parchment clings to the air like memory itself. You move through the library's rows, where every shelf hums with whispers of the past, and you catch sight of her, Hermione Granger, sitting alone at a desk with her wand casting a faint golden glow. Her eyes move quickly, but not across words. They drift somewhere far away, toward ghosts of choices she cannot undo. You think you'd survive a night like this, surrounded by books instead of battles, but you probably won't. At least, not without feeling the pull of that same quiet ache she hides behind perfection. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. The night air seems to hum with anticipation, as if the castle itself is listening, waiting for you to notice what everyone else ignored, that Hermione's grief began not in war, but in silence. I'm really curious, from which part of the world are you watching this video? Write your country in the comments. Let's see how far this little story has traveled. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. The war, they said, was over. The banners were rolled up, the speeches made, the monuments polished until even sorrow had a sheen to it. But you know better than to believe in tidy endings. The war lives on in the smallest corners, under fingernails, in half-finished cups of tea gone cold at Hermione's desk, in the way she still startles at thunder that sounds too much like spells ricocheting through the night. You see her walking briskly through Diagon Alley one morning, hair tied too tight, eyes unfocused, as if her mind is still inside a tent full of plans and maps and names that no longer belong to the living. Historians later called it post-war reconstruction, though among witches and wizards, the debate was always whether rebuilding the world was harder than saving it. Hermione throws herself into it. Committees, reform drafts, educational decrees, yet each parchment she signs seems to weigh more than the last. You notice how she never looks at the names on the memorial wall for long. Fred, Remus, Tonks, Colin. The list hums like a spell she refuses to say aloud. One fringe theory you once read argued that grief can leave a magical residue, like static on a wireless, and that spells cast in mourning retain the caster's sorrow long after they're gone. Perhaps that's why quills sputter when she writes too fast. Perhaps that's why her Patronus, once bright and silvery, flickers now, as if it too can't bear the light. Still, she jokes sometimes, dry humor about ministry bureaucracy, about how paperwork might outlive Dark Lords, and you almost laugh with her until you realize that laughter is just another form of defense. Some nights, she dreams of laughter turning to screams. Some mornings, she wakes and casts silencio on her own heartbeat just to have a moment of peace. And in that quiet, the war marches on, invisible, undefeated. You visit her old flat one autumn evening, long after the newspapers stopped printing anniversary articles about the Battle of Hogwarts. The air smells faintly of tea gone stale and ink that never dried properly, like the ghosts of plans abandoned mid-thought. There's a photo on the mantel, Ron's freckled grin frozen mid-laugh, and beside it, a small crack in the glass that splits his face right through the eyes. Hermione doesn't seem to notice anymore. She's pacing, her hair pulled into a hasty knot, muttering about a new policy at the ministry that she helped write but no longer believes in. You listen quietly as she talks about equality, reform, and the ethics of magical law, yet the words fall flat in the air, as though she's trying to convince herself more than anyone else. Once, you remember, she used to speak with fire. Now there's only the faint crackle of embers. Scholars often debate whether survivors of great wars ever truly return to who they were. Some argue that they rebuild new selves from fragments. Others claim the old self becomes a ghost that follows forever. Hermione, it seems, has done both. She still corrects misquoted charms in newspapers, still reorganizes her bookshelf alphabetically by discipline, but when you mention Ron, her face hardens slightly, like glass cooling after flame. There are rumors. She left, he stayed, or perhaps it was the other way around. But what's certain is that love, even in the wizarding world, is rarely immune to the slow corrosion of silence. You find a stack of Muggle psychology books beside her bed, one open to a chapter titled Survivor's Guilt. She marks passages not with ink, but with strands of her own hair. It's almost poetic, if it weren't so quietly tragic. That night, when she thinks you've fallen asleep, you hear her whisper his name, not as longing, but as apology, and you realize grief doesn't always roar. Sometimes it just rearranges furniture, turning a home into a museum of what once felt safe. When Hermione returns to Hogwarts, it's not as a student, but as a professor, the youngest in a century, though she doesn't mention that to anyone. The castle greets her with its familiar chill, the scent of wax and parchment thick as nostalgia, yet something in its corridors feels different now, quieter, older, as if the walls themselves remember the screams. She moves through the great hall during the first feast, offering nods and polite smiles. But when the Sorting Hat begins its song, her eyes drift to the empty space where Fred Weasley used to sit, and her hand curls into a fist beneath the table. History books like to describe Hogwarts as a living institution, though even the most skeptical scholars admit the castle sometimes behaves as though it mourns. Doors creak open for her, a heartbeat late. Staircases change direction just as she approaches, and once, late at night, the portrait of Dumbledore murmurs, "You've come home, but you've not come back." You'd laugh if it weren't so haunting. She teaches arithmancy now. Clean numbers, pure logic, no moral ambiguity, and her students adore her, though they whisper that she always looks as though she's listening for something no one else can hear. The fringe theory of architectural empathy claims that magical structures absorb the emotions of those who inhabit them, resonating with joy or despair depending on who crosses their thresholds. If that's true, then the Gryffindor Tower feels heavy this year, like a heart holding its breath. You watch her pause by the window overlooking the Black Lake, where the moon paints her reflection silver. "Progress," she says softly, as if testing the word for flavor. But progress is a strange spell. It rebuilds walls, not wounds. At night, she walks the same paths she once ran down as a girl, counting her steps to stay awake, afraid that sleep will bring back the sound of falling stone, or the echo of her own voice screaming for help that never came soon enough. She still carries her wand everywhere, though the war is long gone. Maybe, she tells herself, it's just habit. But you in the castle know better. The Mirror of Erist stands quietly in a locked chamber now, dusty and forgotten, though the legends about it never really faded. You find Hermione there one night after curfew, long after even the ghosts have retreated into silence. The air hums with the kind of stillness that only exists in rooms meant for revelation. She stands before the mirror, pale candlelight trembling in her reflection, her eyes fixed not on what she sees, but on what she wishes she didn't. For a long while she says nothing, only stares. You approach slowly, feeling as though you're intruding on a prayer. "What do you see?" you ask. Her voice is soft, nearly brittle. "Myself, before I became someone I don't recognize." Scholars often debate whether the mirror shows true desire or the most dangerous form of self-delusion. Some claim it's not magic at all, but a manifestation of memory stitched with longing, a sort of psychological charm. Others insist it reflects the potential self, the person one might have been had the world been kinder. Whatever the truth, Hermione's reflection isn't younger or happier. It's her, seated at a table with her parents, both alive, both aware of who she is. The reflection smiles. She doesn't. You notice the smallest details, the unfinished crossword her father once tried to solve, the soft curl of her mother's hair, the way the reflection, Hermione looks unburdened, as though the war never happened. It's painful in its ordinariness. "You can't live in there," you whisper, but she already knows. The mirror's glass flickers, and for a brief second, you think you see her reflection reach forward, fingers brushing against the surface like two timelines trying to merge. Then the glow fades, and she steps back. "I thought knowledge would save me," she murmurs. "It just taught me how many ways a heart can break." The candle sputters, throwing ripples of shadow across the floor. You realize that her greatest battle was never against dark wizards or impossible odds. It was against her own refusal to feel the pain she earned. She turns away, her reflection lingering behind her like a loyal ghost. As she leaves, you swear the mirror sighs, a faint whisper that might just be her name. The Ministry of Magic has always been a place of paradoxes, gilded floors and moral quicksand, polished speeches masking bureaucratic chaos. When Hermione first took her post there, people whispered that the Golden Girl of Hogwarts would finally fix everything, that ethics and order would finally coexist. You wish you could tell them how naive that hope was. Years have passed since the war, yet the ministry remains a labyrinth of parchment, politics, and people pretending to do good. And on an overcast morning that smells faintly of ink and burnt coffee, Hermione's world begins to crack. It starts with a file, a slim, unassuming stack of documents stamped "Confidential, Memory Regulation Department." Inside are letters, meeting minutes, and testimonies she recognizes. They reference a post-war program she helped design, something meant to restore lost memories to victims of oblivion. But as she reads, horror dawns. The program didn't restore memories. It replaced them. Reconstructed identities, fabricated pasts, whole lives rewritten under the justification of psychological mercy. She stands frozen, the room spinning around her, realizing that her idealism, her need to fix the unfixable, has been used as the ministry's moral disguise. That day, she locks herself in her office, every spell she casts sharper, colder, more precise than ever. The walls hum faintly. Magic always reacts to emotion. There's a crack along the edge of her desk from where she slammed her hand, and a coffee mug floats uncertainly mid-air, forgotten. A historian would later call this the ethics scandal of 2005. A brief but explosive controversy that forced policy reform. But you know that for Hermione, it's not about politics. It's about guilt. A fringe academic paper by a St. Mungo's healer once suggested that remorse itself can act like a hex, binding to the magical core of the caster and dulling their power over time. Maybe that's why her charms misfire lately. Maybe that's why her light spells burn too dim. She doesn't cry. Not exactly. She just stops moving, the silence around her thick and brittle. You notice the framed photo of Harry and Ron on her shelf. Harry's hand is mid-wave, Ron's grin bright. For the first time, she turns the frame face down. Later, during a hearing, she's called to testify. The press paints her as either savior or saboteur, depending on the headline. She speaks plainly, too plainly, admitting the program's failure, admitting her part in it, refusing to hide behind magical jargon. Her voice doesn't shake once, but when she sits down, her wand slips from her fingers. No one notices. Outside the courtroom, a cold rain falls, the kind that slicks cobblestones into mirrors. She walks home without an umbrella, the storm water seeping into her sleeves. You follow at a distance, watching how she doesn't flinch, how she moves like someone who's decided that pain, finally, is the only honest teacher left. That night, she opens her journal and writes one line: "There are no good spells for regret." Then she draws a tiny rune beside it, an ancient symbol meaning truth endures, used by early witches who believed remorse was the final stage of purification. Historians still argue about whether remorse weakens or strengthens a witch's power. Hermione doesn't care anymore. She's too busy cleaning up her own ghost story. She sends her resignation the next morning, quietly, respectfully, with perfect grammar. And when her quill leaves the last dot of ink, the parchment curls at the edges, as if relieved. She doesn't look back. The Forbidden Wing isn't supposed to exist anymore. Officially, it was sealed after the Second Wizarding War, its dangerous texts relocated, its locks warded with enchantments strong enough to deter even the most ambitious cursebreaker. But forbidden is just another word for Hermione's next project, and one stormy night, she stands before the door again, wand in hand, rain-soaked hair clinging to her cheeks. The castle's air shifts, aware, as if it recognizes the heartbeat of someone who once swore to protect it. You can almost taste the tension, the faint copper tang of old spells reawakening. The door groans open with a reluctant sigh, and dust spins in the candlelight like slow-moving stars. She steps inside, and the world feels heavier, as though each book is holding its breath. This is no ordinary library wing. It's an archive of human frailty disguised as scholarship. On the shelves lie manuscripts bound in dragonhide, journals sealed with wax sigils, grimoires that whisper if you listen too closely. The scent of parchment mixes with something metallic, like old blood or burnt time. She walks the aisles without a plan, fingers trailing across spines until one book flinches at her touch, a thick volume titled Ars Oblivio, The Craft of Unremembering, a fringe piece of magical history, banned after scholars deemed it psychologically corrosive. She opens it anyway. Inside, ink swirls like liquid shadow, forming and reforming sentences as though rewriting itself to suit its reader. To alter memory, it reads, is to alter truth, and truth, once touched, no longer obeys. For a long moment she stares at that line, heart thudding. Then she flips deeper, scanning diagrams of neural runes and temporal threads, the theoretical mechanics of rewriting consciousness. Some of it she already knows. She invented parts of it, long ago, before ethics caught up with her ambition. But the book whispers new temptations, methods to distribute memory, to store pain elsewhere, to fragment grief into something bearable. Her breath trembles. Imagine being able to take away just the worst parts, the screams, the smell of fire, her parents' blank faces. Imagine a day of silence in her mind. The thought alone is dangerous magic. The room seems to pulse with it. Every candle flickers lower, casting the walls in trembling gold. You can feel the castle watching, disapproving, and somewhere deep within, you recall a debate once held at the Department of Mysteries, whether memory, in its purest form, possesses moral weight. Some argued it's neutral, like ink on paper. Others, like the unspeakable thorn, insisted memory is the soul's anchor. Remove too much, and the self unravels. Hermione read that report years ago. Now, standing in the echoing dark, she wonders whether unraveling might be a relief. She whispers a spell, an old experimental incantation she once designed for trauma recovery, and the air ripples. For an instant, you see flickers of light around her head, moments peeling away like old film strips. The war, her parents, the courtroom, all images struggling to escape their host. But the spell collapses mid-air, burning out with a sound like tearing cloth. She stumbles, gasping, clutching her wand to her chest. The candles flare back to life, furious. Something inside the book laughs, a sound like distant thunder turned human. You realize this isn't knowledge meant for peace. It's a trap designed to test the will of those desperate enough to open it. Hermione slams the tome shut, her heartbeat echoing in the silence. "No," she whispers, not to the book, not even to herself, but to the idea of erasure. She slides it back onto the shelf, though her hands shake violently, leaving faint smudges of blood where the parchment cut her. And then, something extraordinary happens. The castle sighs. The wind outside softens. The torches along the corridor ignite on their own, and for the first time in years, the air in the Forbidden Wing feels warm. You think you hear a voice, a blend of McGonagall's stern clarity and Dumbledore's quiet humor, murmuring, "Well done, Miss Granger." She leaves without another word, closing the door behind her. When it seals, you see faint golden light thread through the cracks like veins healing a wound. Later, historians will write theories about how the Forbidden Wing was restored that night, how the last surviving enchantments finally stabilized after decades of imbalance. None will mention her, but you know, the act of walking away, of choosing to remember, is its own kind of restoration. As she steps into the empty corridor, moonlight spilling across the flagstones, you notice that for the first time since the war, her reflection in a passing window doesn't flinch. It simply looks back. Whole grief, it turns out, is not something you outgrow. It's something you grow around. Months after that night in the Forbidden Wing, Hermione finds herself back in the same rhythm, teaching, lecturing, existing. But the world feels sharper now, as if every moment cuts a little deeper and shines a little truer. The Ministry scandal is behind her, the castle has quieted, and yet every so often, when she passes her reflection in a window or catches the scent of rain on parchment, something old stirs beneath her ribs. You follow her one Sunday morning as she walks the length of the Black Lake, the surface so still it looks like polished obsidian. Her wand dangles at her side, unused. She stops midway, picks up a small stone, and skips it across the water. The ripples distort her reflection into something almost unrecognizable. Two versions of Hermione superimposed, one weary, one becoming. It's here you realize that she's facing the choice she's been circling for years, to let go or to forget. The two aren't the same. Forgetting, after all, would be mercy without growth. Letting go is acceptance with scars. She's lived both sides of that argument. She's rewritten minds, rewritten laws, rewritten herself until her own handwriting looks foreign. But you can't unwrite grief. You can only translate it. In one of her classes, she once told her students that every spell begins as language, a pattern of sound and intention, and that the truest magic is simply learning to say things differently. Maybe healing works the same way. Maybe she just needs a new syntax for pain. You watch her pull a folded page from her pocket, one of the old letters she wrote to her parents years ago. The ink has faded, but the words are still legible, half apology, half confession. She reads it silently, lips moving, but no sound emerging, and when she's done, she burns it with a whisper. The flame glows blue, then gold, then fades into ash that the wind carries across the lake. For a moment, you swear the water glows too, as if the world itself acknowledges what she's done. In Muggle psychology, there's a theory that mourning never ends. It simply becomes integrated into the self, like a scar that changes how you move, but not where you stand. Wizards have their own version. Dolorem vincere non est oblivici, sed intelligere. To conquer grief is not to forget, but to understand. Hermione knows that now. Still, there's a temptation that lingers. The allure of those forbidden spells, the idea that one small charm could ease the ache. One evening, she tests herself. She retrieves a vial from her drawer filled with the silvery threads of memory she once extracted in the hope of cleansing her thoughts. They swirl faintly, fragile as moonlight on water. All she would have to do is pour them into the pensieve, step inside, and reabsorb the moments she tried to excise. but she hesitates. There's a legend, half academic and half superstition, that if you reabsorb a memory rejected by your own mind, it doesn't return to its old place. It latches onto the heart instead, transforming remembrance into empathy. The Unspeakables denied it, of course, calling it sentimental folklore. Hermione isn't so sure. She lifts the vial to her lips like a potion, whispers an apology to the past, and drinks. The effect is immediate. A shiver races through her spine, her pulse quickens, and she sees fragments. Her parents in the kitchen, Ron's laughter in winter, Harry's weary smile after battle, Dobby's grave, Snape's eyes softening just before the end. Each memory lands not in her mind, but somewhere deeper, like roots sinking into soil. When she opens her eyes, there are tears, silent, unforced, clean. The room hums with quiet power. She exhales, and the candlelight brightens of its own accord. There's something alive in that stillness, as if magic itself has accepted her reconciliation. The next morning, she writes her first new letter in years, not to her parents, not to the ministry, but to herself. She thanks the version of her who fought, who broke, who survived by building walls. Then she writes to the one who learned to dismantle them, brick by careful brick. It's the first time she signs her own name without hesitation. Hermione John Granger, she writes, the ink steady, the period final. When she steps outside, the world greets her in small kindnesses. A student waves from across the courtyard, an owl lands on her shoulder with a letter from Luna, and the sun, faint and winter pale, still manages to find her face. She stands there, eyes closed, breathing in the scent of frost and parchment and distant wood smoke. The castle bells toll the hour, and for once she doesn't rush. She just listens. Somewhere far above, the portraits murmur approval. The ghosts drift quietly by. Hogwarts, for all its hauntings, feels a little less haunted now. Before she returns inside, she kneels by a stone at the lake's edge, a small, unmarked memorial she built herself years ago. The engraving is simple. To those I remember, no names, no dates, just the weight of acknowledgement. She places a single daisy on it, not conjured, but picked by hand, its petals trembling in the breeze. And as she stands again, the reflection in the water no longer looks divided. It's just her, whole, tired, and finally at peace with the fact that peace isn't perfect. It's a practice. As you watch her walk back toward the castle, cloak trailing, you think of all the stories that will never make the textbooks, the quiet heroism of those who fought their wars long after the battlefield emptied. Scholars will continue to argue whether grief diminishes magic or refines it. But you know now what she's learned. Magic was never in the wand, or the words, or even the will to fight. It was in the staying, the enduring, the remembering. She glances over her shoulder once, meeting your gaze as if she knows you've been watching all along, and smiles. Not the polite, closed-lip smile of the professor, but something smaller, freer, utterly human. I'm still here, her eyes seem to say, and maybe that's the greatest spell of all. Years have a strange way of dissolving when you live among things that remember you. The castle changes slowly, the world faster, and Hermione, though she never quite stops moving, learns to rest inside the rhythm of it all. She no longer hides in classrooms or libraries at odd hours. She walks the grounds each morning with a small mug of coffee that perpetually refills itself, a charm from Luna she's never managed to reverse. The new generation of students greet her with the kind of reverence that borders on myth. Some call her Professor Granger. Others whisper stories of her role in the Battle of Hogwarts, as if she were a figure carved into the very walls. But you know better. You know she still loses her train of thought mid-lecture when she glimpses a freckled face that reminds her of Ron, still hesitates before casting a simple charm that once belonged to Fred's joke shop. Healing isn't erasure, it's integration, like layers of parchment pressed together until they form a stronger page. She lives now in a small cottage on the edge of Hogsmeade, where lilac grows wild against the fence and owls roost on the roof beam. The days unfold softly. Lesson plans by morning, correspondence with Harry by afternoon, the occasional visit from Ginny or Luna by evening. They laugh easily these days, though each carries their own ghosts. Harry has a slight limp now, courtesy of one too many heroic detours. Ginny still scolds him for it with affectionate fury. When they visit, Hermione bakes bread badly and charms the kitchen to clean itself before anyone can tease her. The smell of yeast and warmth fills the cottage, mingling with laughter that sounds almost like music. It's strange, isn't it? How ordinary happiness can feel so miraculous after years of chaos. Every once in a while, she still dreams of the war, flashes of fire, the hiss of curses, but now they end differently. Instead of running, she walks through the dream calmly, touching the burned walls, the broken wands, whispering to the echoes, "You can rest now." The mind, you've come to realize, eventually learns to fold its nightmares into lullabies. There's even a touch of humor in her nightmares these days, Fred offering commentary from beyond, McGonagall rolling her eyes at his jokes. The subconscious has its own sense of balance. One afternoon, she receives an invitation from the ministry, an honorary lecture series on the ethics of memory in post-war societies. She almost refuses, but something inside her, perhaps the same stubborn streak that once dragged her into danger, decides otherwise. In the grand marble atrium, before an audience of scholars and aurors and bright-eyed students, she speaks without notes. Her voice is calm, slow, deliberate. She tells them that knowledge without compassion is a weapon, that truth is a living thing that must be tended, not owned. Magic, she says, isn't what we cast, it's what we carry. The hall goes utterly still. For the first time, she feels no tremor in her wand hand. Afterward, an old archivist approaches her with tears in his eyes. "You've rewritten history again," he says softly. She smiles. "No," she replies. "I just corrected the spelling." Outside, the sunset paints the world in copper and rose. You follow her as she walks through the cobblestone streets, stopping at a small bench near the fountain. Children play nearby, their laughter unguarded, their tiny sparks of accidental magic lighting the dusk. Hermione watches them with a faint, wistful smile. The scholar in her still studies everything, but the woman, older, gentler, finally lets herself simply witness. A breeze stirs, and she closes her eyes, whispering something you can barely hear. A thank you, maybe, or a prayer. There's a line from a forgotten Muggle poet she once loved. "Grief is the proof that love once worked." She repeats it sometimes to her students when they ask about the losses of the war. "We are proof," she tells them. "Every one of us still here." It's the kind of wisdom you can only speak once you've lived it. And she has, completely. Her house fills slowly with souvenirs of a quieter life. Tea tins from friends, letters from former pupils, stacks of journals with notes she no longer feels the need to publish. When she sits by the window at night, she reads aloud to herself. Not textbooks or spell theory, but novels, poetry, even the occasional mystery story that makes her laugh out loud. The sound carries softly across the hills, and sometimes you'd swear the wind laughs back. Years from now, when the world has moved on and history books distill her name into a neat paragraph, the castle will still whisper her story correctly. It will tell the new first years that once there was a girl who fought with her mind as fiercely as others fought with wands, who loved too deeply to let the world stay cruel, who learned that forgiveness is the hardest spell of all, and when the torches burn low and the portraits close their eyes for the night, the castle will hum with something like contentment. And so, as you stand beside her one last time, her hair streaked with silver now, her eyes bright as ever, you realize this isn't a story about loss at all. It's about reclamation, the slow, defiant act of living after the storm. She gazes toward the horizon where the first stars appear and breathes deeply. "They say time heals," she murmurs, "but I think it just teaches us how to hold things more gently." The night settles around her like an old cloak. Crickets sing, the wind sighs through the trees, and you too feel the quiet weight of peace, not the absence of pain, but the understanding of it. You close your eyes, letting her voice linger in your mind like the last warm note of a spell that doesn't quite end, but fades beautifully, infinitely. And now, as the story settles, let your thoughts drift with it. Imagine the soft creak of the old cottage door, the faint scratch of quill on parchment, the hush of night folding itself around everything broken and made whole again. Maybe you too have letters you never sent, moments you wish you could rewrite, memories that ache like half-faded scars. Let them breathe tonight. Let them rest beside Hermione's, in that invisible library where every sorrow eventually learns its place. The world outside hums quietly, rain on rooftops, wind in leaves, time doing its patient work. So, take a deep breath. The worst has passed. The story is safe now. You are safe now. Sleep well.